Andrzej Duda, he's set to deliver a speech urging the free world to rally to Ukraine's cause. I'm Pablo Folielias. Welcome to the programme. After a month of fighting that's left thousands dead and sent millions on the run, Moscow says it's shifting its focus to Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. While the Kremlin claims it successfully completed the first phase of what it calls its military operation, analysts say it could be a sign that Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to save face after failing to subdue Ukraine or capture its capital, Kyiv. But as Moscow changes focus, the human tragedy of the invasion shows no sign of abating.
Signs of spring greeted Kyiv on Saturday as Ukraine shakes off its winter and enters a new phase of war. There may be a change in strategy after Russian defeats, but there's little respite for those on the front lines of battle. Many are visibly exhausted but steadfast in their determination to stay. Putin came, as you can see, he says. Our children and grandchildren are dying. I'm 62. I can't leave this place. I'll stay here. If need be, I will die here. But I will not give them Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have recaptured areas on the outskirts of the capital, Kyiv. Still, lives continue to be destroyed. At this hospital in Kharkiv, the wounded continue to arrive as Ukrainian forces come under heavy fire. In Mariupol, the damage inflicted by Russian bombs is clear. Unfortunately, nothing remains of Mariupol, and they're bombing it with savage weapons. This last week there have been explosions like I've never heard before. They hit residential areas with rockets. Hundreds continue to flee Mariupol, saying goodbye to their decimated city and to those who must stay behind.
Well, let's bring in DW correspondent Nick Conley, who's in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Hi, Nick. Good to see you. Now, despite the fact that Russia has said it will focus on the eastern Donbass region, we understand that war is still raging in the south, in the cities of Mariupol and Kherson. Can you give us more on that?
I think there are very few people here in Ukraine who would take that announcement at face value. I think this is more about trying to make lesser demands, make a more manageable goal to then sell to the Russian public as a success, given what is arguably a fiasco in the rest of the country and Russia's failure to make significant progress in recent weeks. Going into this, you had messages from Moscow about being able to take Kiev in a matter of days rather than weeks, and that obviously hasn't happened. Indeed, there is a lot of fighting beyond Donbass, not just around me here in Kiev, 25 kilometers down the road in Irpin, the fighting continues, although it seems like the Ukrainians have been able to push back Russian forces quite significantly in some places near Kiev. In the south, around Mykolaiv and Kherson, is some news coming in today that even the Ukrainians were able to return to Kherson, which had been the one major Ukrainian city under full Russian control so far. So pretty difficult to really judge those carefully because there aren't many journalists, independent journalists on the ground, but a sense that this is a war that is very much going on, and this is by no means the beginning of the end.
Nick, you've touched on it there, but does Russia's new focus on eastern Ukraine mean that the capital is off the hook? Do you think that Russian troops might fall back?
Well, we've seen that Ukrainian success east of the river, that supposedly Russian troops have been pushed back by quite some way. But on the other hand, just 20 kilometers direct line from where I'm standing now in downtown Kiev. They are still there, and we hear the shooting, we hear the artillery, some very big bangs this morning, quite close. I think that was Ukrainian anti-aircraft systems knocking some projectiles out of the sky. So this is very much still going on. Yes, people are getting used to it. There are kind of new routines. People are coming out in greater numbers, but it doesn't mean the danger isn't still there. We're having routine reports of residential buildings being hit, people being hurt. This is still going on, and the shooting and the artillery continues.
Well, another issue is what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky makes of Russia's shift in focus now. Today he addressed representatives from countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia at the Doha Forum. Let's have a listen.
This is also a question of abandoning the usage of Russian oil and gas. Responsible states, like the state of Qatar, are reliable and solid exporters of energy resources, and they can make their contribution to the stabilization in Europe. They can do much to restore justice. The future of Europe rests with your efforts. It depends on your efforts. I ask you to increase the output of energy to ensure that everyone in Russia understands that no country can use energy as a weapon and to blackmail the world.
Well, it appears like an attempt by President Zelensky to speed up the West's move away from Russian gas and oil. Nick, is that the case?
Definitely, and people here will tell you that since the beginning of the war in late February, a month ago, Europe alone has transferred about 20 billion euros to Russia for coal, for oil and gas. At the same time, Ukraine has received just about 4 to 5 billion. So you can see in terms of the kind of order of scale there, Russia getting a lot of money to pay for this military campaign. And obviously that is a priority here now in Ukraine. They say that the sanctions on Russian banks and other Russian businesses is all well and good, but it's not enough. And to force the Kremlin to really stop this campaign, the only thing that will help now is an embargo and an immediate end to those transfers of huge amounts of hard currency.
Well, on the other hand, Russia has barely budged on its demands on Ukraine, including that Kyiv recognise the self-proclaimed republics in Donetsk and Luhansk. Is that a red line Zelensky is willing to cross, Nick?
I think for now it's a definite no. He's talked about maybe being open to some kind of deal over NATO membership. That's been an aspiration in Ukraine for some years now. That could be up on the table, but accepting the independence of those self-proclaimed republics, I think that is a no-go. Ukraine feeling that it is doing well and that success on the battlefield is being recognised by Western partners doesn't feel like it needs to make that kind of painful concession right now, and it's pretty hard to see why the Ukrainian public would agree to that kind of thing, would accept that kind of deal after so many deaths and so much suffering across the country, in a situation where, unlike 2014, this country hasn't collapsed militarily and is still going in spite of a month of war.
DW correspondent Nick Connolly, thank you and take care. Well, I'm joined now by Raphael Loss from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Hi, Raphael. Good to have you here on DW. Now, the Russian military is now saying that phase one of the invasion is, quote, mostly complete, and it'll now focus its war on the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. Do you buy that, or has the shift been announced because of the failure to take the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv?
I think from what we can tell, Russian armed forces are definitely overstretched. Their supply lines are buckling under Ukrainian pressure. There is some danger of Russian troops being encircled by Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian armed forces have been able to mount limited counteroffensives in some areas. What I would caution of is from the statements that we've heard out of Moscow in the last couple of hours to assess that anything changes in Vladimir Putin's strategic goals. I think what we see is an operational reorganization to limit the exposure of Russian armed forces and to reprioritize goals as part of this campaign. But again, if they take the Donbass, there's nothing that would prevent them from returning to Kiev.
Raphael, how do you assess the change in strategy against the backdrop of domestic support in Russia for the invasion?
It's difficult to assess. One, we must recognize that the Kremlin has a tight grip on the Russian media ecosystem. It has consolidated authoritarian rule over the past couple of weeks, as well as the campaign against Ukraine has commenced. And that is a long-standing trend that Vladimir Putin has facilitated over the past 20 years since he's come to power in 2000. So I find it difficult to, one, rely on sort of public opinion polls that are coming out of Russia there. We need to recognize that often people are exposed to just one side of the story. But we also have to see that especially a lot of young people who have experience abroad are leaving Russia, and that the Russian economy in the long term is under a lot of pressure, particularly emerging technologies, startups, and so on and so forth, are relocating to outside of Russia.
Let's talk a little bit about President Putin. Could this be a potential face-saving move by him?
I think in the short term it might be, but as I said earlier, I think it would be wrong to assess that Vladimir Putin has moderated his goals vis-a-vis Ukraine. I think his rhetoric towards Ukraine as a nation, as a country, as a people, has been fairly consistent over the past couple of years. He's negated that there is such a thing as a Ukrainian identity that is separate from a Russian identity. And so I think we need to recognize and prepare for a sort of longer-term pressure campaign against Ukraine and a longer-term pressure campaign against the West who's supporting Ukraine.
Now, US President Joe Biden is in Poland. Is he succeeding in keeping the NATO countries united?
I think he is, but that is something that is on the shoulders of the European NATO allies as well, and Canada too, I think. What we've seen over the past couple of days in various Brussels meetings, from the G7 to the EU Council meeting to the NATO Council meeting, is a very unified West. There are some differences, I think, when it comes, for example, to energy sanctions. Germany is very reluctant there. Some other Eastern allies and the United States have been putting some pressure on Berlin on this issue. But nevertheless, I think overall the picture that emerged from Brussels and that is now being re-emphasized in Poland by Biden and his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, is one of unity. That is somewhat unexpected because if you recall, the American presidential election 2 years ago, then Poland was very much hoping for Donald Trump to return to the White House. And there was some disappointment when Joe Biden criticized Poland and Hungary together with Belarus for sort of creeping authoritarianism. But I think the current crisis has led to a rally around the flag effect within NATO, right, within the EU, in a fairly united West.
Raphael Loss from the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Right, well, we have some breaking news coming in. There are reports of 3 loud explosions in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. A local city official described the blasts as powerful and called on people to remain calm and stay in their homes. We'll have more on that developing story in our ongoing coverage of the war in Ukraine. Moving on, let's take a look at some other developments in the war. French President Emmanuel Macron has proposed an international mission to evacuate people from Mariupol, the Ukrainian city devastated by Russian attacks. Macron said he was working on a humanitarian operation together with Turkey and Greece, and he would soon call Russian President Vladimir Putin to work out the details. Crowds unfurled a giant Ukrainian flag and shouted "Go home" at a rally in Slavuch after Russian forces entered the city and seized a hospital in the town. Russian forces responded by firing into the air and deploying stun grenades to disperse the crowd. Well, on his second day in Poland, US President Joe Biden is to deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The White House says the president will call on the free world to stand against Vladimir Putin. President Biden is in Warsaw for talks with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda. The two are set to discuss the situation in Ukraine with the West's military, humanitarian and economic response to the war on the agenda. Earlier, Biden also met with the Ukrainian foreign minister and defense minister in his first face-to-face talks with top Ukrainian officials since the war began. Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent, Barbara Wiesel, who's outside the presidential palace in Warsaw. Hi, Barbara. Good to see you. Now, President Biden is meeting with the Polish president. What can we expect from it?
Of course, we can expect that some of the things he talked about with the Ukrainian ministers, particularly the request for more and stronger and further reaching weapons, will be also on the table here behind me. But if we take a little look around here, we can see that this visit of Joe Biden here in Warsaw is quite the sensation for local people. Many of them have come out to sort of watch the president walk into the presidential palace here. And of course, they saw his whole security machinery and the beast, the famous presidential limousine, which is now parked out of view, of course. And the two presidents are inside there. And after having sort of pushed to the side a bit of the political and diplomatic rubble that's in the past of those two presidents, because Andrzej Duda took his good time after recognizing the election victory of Joe Biden last time. They will really have to sort of come to the point, what more can the international community do in order to strengthen Ukrainian resistance against the invasion of Russia, and what more can they do also to sort of keep Ukraine strong and alive on the other side of the border, which is not that far from here, actually. So that is really the main point, and Poland is the leader in sort of pushing for stronger sanctions, for more measures against Russia.
Well, that actually brings me on to my next question. What exactly are they calling for if they want a tougher stance against Russia?
They've published a 10-point plan, and some parts of it are quite simple. For instance, prevent any Russian trade going through Belarus to the European Union, which is still taking place, and just close those borders. Cut off oil and gas immediately. Don't wait for another few months or till the end of the year. Do it right now, because it's important to sort of hurt Russia economically right now. And sort of a string of other measures similar to that, really sort of on the economic side. Of course, a call for better and more weapons, a call for fighter jets for Ukraine in order to defend themselves against the Russians in the airspace. And finally, of course, it is the ongoing call of Poland to send in a humanitarian mission under international and NATO protection to evacuate the embattled regions, particularly in the southeast, or areas like Mariupol, where civilians are really under siege conditions, and Poland says we can't look on, we really have to do something against it now, not in 3 months or in a half year.
Now, Joe Biden is set to deliver a speech as well, Barbara. What can we expect to hear from the US president?
Yeah, this is announced to be a sort of a speech that will set the ground for the further relations, of course, within NATO, for unity within the Western community. And he will also call, of course, for unity in standing up against what the United States call the battle between democracies and autocratic forces. And they see this as sort of a very basic and very as a matter of principle, really. They say we have to stand up to this, otherwise we will be weakened. This is a fight that is fought in Ukraine, that it concerns all of us, that really delineates the two sides here in the world, and it's like good and evil, black and white. It seems to be very strong in that regard from the little that we heard beforehand. So he's really wanting to set the ground for the next months and for the future of NATO and the European Union and transatlantic relations, of course.
DW correspondent Barbara Wiesel in Warsaw, thank you. Well, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And with me here in studio is DW reporter William Glucroft. Good to see you, William. Now, this visit is a delicate balancing act, we'll say, for Biden. It's no secret that relations between the US and Poland have been not the smoothest. So tell us a little bit more.
That's right. I mean, it's definitely not a black and white situation, because Poland is both this golden child right now of NATO, of the West, of its solidarity, being so geographically and strategically important to Ukraine. And it's the black sheep of the West, because Biden himself has pointed out that Poland is in some ways slipping into authoritarianism with this very conservative government, a government that was more aligned with Trump's view of the world. When Biden was elected president, it took a while for people like Duda to acknowledge that, to congratulate Biden's win. So there might be some bad blood there. And there's a number of very real political differences, both as far as the United States sees things and the European Union, which Poland is a member state of, such as, very strict restrictions against abortion, very, very difficult for LGBTQ plus community. There's been almost elimination of an independent judiciary in Poland, which is a cornerstone of any truly democratic country. And that's what the EU has had so many problems with Poland about. So while we're seeing these two parallel and contrasting situations where Poland is being held up as so important for NATO and Western solidarity, but at the same time, EU officials and Biden administration officials are cautioning not to forget all these other darker things, all these other more critical aspects of Poland, not to let that slip away and hold them to account.
Right, well, moving on a little bit to this unprecedented show of unity that we've seen among Western allies, and that's resulted as well in some pretty big shifts in policy. We don't need to look too far. Germany, of course, being one of those countries. Tell us a little bit more about that. Yeah, we are definitely in a new Germany. We've already seen this massive shift on defense spending, which, after decades of Germany shying away from hard power, from military power, will soon have, if the Bundestag approves it, will soon have the largest military budget in Europe after for so many years dragging its feet on military spending, getting criticized for not spending enough, for not modernizing its forces. It's about to get a lot of money, the $100 billion that we've been hearing about. Of course, there's also the energy issue. The United States has the gas and oil embargo on Russia. It's much easier for the United States to do that. German officials will always tell you, yeah, easy for the U.S. to do that. Russia is literally next door to us. It's right here. It is a neighbor. It is not going away, good or bad. We have to deal with it in a way that the United States can be more distanced from. And we see that in terms of energy independence, with the EU and Germany in particular so much more heavily reliant on Russian gas, specifically, also oil and coal to a slightly less amount. And we've heard very honest assessments coming from, for example, Robert Habeck in the German government saying, we're just not going to be able to get off it that quickly, and an embargo is just not a realistic option right now. DW reporter William Glucroft, thanks for your analysis. Well, many of those who flee Ukraine often arrive traumatized in neighbouring countries. The war itself, the sudden need to leave everything behind, and the journey out, as well as the uncertainty of what might come next, can be overwhelming. DW's Monika Szyratska sent us this report from the train station in Przemyśl on the Polish border with Ukraine. There she met Ewa Budna. She's a Polish psychotherapist who's worked in Germany for decades, just one of several German and Polish mental health professionals offering new arrivals psychological first aid. Now to some of the other stories we're following for you this hour. A Saudi-led coalition has launched overnight airstrikes on the Yemeni capital Sana'a and the Red Sea city of Hodeidah, killing at least 7 people. The attack came a day after Iranian-backed Houthi rebels staged a daring attack on an oil depot in the Saudi city of Jeddah ahead of today's Formula One race in the kingdom. A volcano has erupted near a scenic lake in the Philippines. Authorities raised the alert level in the region and urged residents to evacuate. There have been volcanic earthquakes and concerns that further eruptions may occur. Experts are warning of possible fast-moving gas and a tsunami in the lake. Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of celebrated rock band Foo Fighters, has died while on tour with the band in Colombia. The 50-year-old joined the group, formed by ex-Nirvana musician Dave Grohl, in 1997. In a statement, the band called his death a tragic and untimely loss. While you're watching DW News, here's a recap of our main stories. In an apparent strategic shift in the face of stiff Ukrainian resistance, Moscow says it will now focus on the eastern Donbas region of Ukraine. Russia claims the first stage of its war in Ukraine is over and that it's been a success. On his second day in Poland, US President Joe Biden has met face-to-face with Ukrainian officials. Later, he'll deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The president will call on the free world to stand against Vladimir Putin. Well, Well, that's all from me for now. Up next is the war in Ukraine rewriting global trade alliances. That's on DW Business in just a moment, and stay tuned for that. And don't forget, you can keep up to date on our website, dw.com, and you can follow us on our social media accounts. I'm Pablo Foley-Elias. Claire Richardson will be here with more headlines for you at the top of the hour. So for me, take care and see you soon.
Russia's war in Ukraine is rewriting global trade alliances. As the West cuts ties with Moscow, Russia is looking east for partnerships with India and China. An in-depth look at the global economic effects of the war in Ukraine on the DW Business Special.
Next on DW. Our interest, the global economy. Our portfolio, DW Business Beyond.
Here's a closer look at the project.
Our mission, to analyze the fight for market dominance.
East versus West.
Get a step ahead with DW Business Beyond.
People in trucks injured while trying to flee the city center.
More and more refugees are being turned away at the border.
Families fleeing bomb attacks in Syria.
Police crackdown in Venezuela against demonstrators.
People fleeing extreme drought.
A raft carrying 200 people has sunk in the Aegean Sea.
Around the world, more than 300 million people are seeking refuge. We ask why? Because no one should have to flee. Make up your own mind. DW, made for minds.
American gas to the rescue? The U.S. pledges to boost shipments of natural gas to the European Union, but will be enough to break the bloc's reliance on Russian energy. Also coming up, India comes under fire for buying up Russian oil spurned by the West. We'll take a look at how economic ties between Moscow and Delhi are evolving. And we'll tell you the story of two farmers forced to leave Ukraine due to Russia's invasion. Now in Germany, they're sending donations and aid to those left behind. Welcome to a special edition of DW Business, looking at how the war is reshaping global trade alliances. I'm Chelsea Delaney in Berlin. The U.S. has agreed to rapidly boost shipments of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to the European Union this year as part of efforts to wean the bloc off Russian fuel. The announcement came during President Joe Biden's visit to Brussels. The U.S. will offer an additional 15 billion cubic meters of LNG in 2022. Last year, they shipped 22 billion cubic meters to the EU. The bloc hopes to replace two-thirds of Russian gas imports by year-end. Germany Friday said its plans to ditch Russian energy are progressing. It expects to import only 30% of its gas from Russia this year.
Qatar is a top producer of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, seen as critical for Germany weaning itself off Russian imports. But the Gulf country is also well known for its stained human rights record. Rights groups criticize the exploitation of Qatar's 2 million migrant workers. The deaths of thousands of workers over the past decade have gone ignored by authorities. Modest labor reforms have reportedly stalled. Other reports point to restricted freedom of expression and the repression of women. As Germany frantically searches for new trade partners, should the country put human rights at the forefront of its trade relations?
Against the background of German history, it's a very important topic. Everybody should think about this when buying products. Our constitution says human dignity is inviolable. That also counts for other countries from which we purchase products.
Definitely. I think especially with globalization, which is increasing, we can't avoid the topic.
Yeah, I think it's important, but it's difficult. We can see that with Habeck's visit to the UAE and the Gulf states. It's like choosing between the lesser of two evils.
For Berlin, finding reliable energy from reliable partners is now a problem with no easy solution. So far, pragmatism prevails.
Now Germany may be taking a pragmatic approach, as we heard there, but it's also indicated it wants more cooperation with like-minded countries. After Russia invaded Ukraine, German Finance Minister Christian Lindner said that Germany, especially now in the Ukraine crisis, it is becoming clear how important free trade is with partners around the world who share our values. He was proposing there a wider trade deal with the U.S. But only transacting with countries that share your values drastically reduces your options. A new survey suggests that for the first time since 2004, there are more countries that are labeled as autocracies than democracies. Among the autocratic countries are some of Germany's main trading partners. That means China, Turkey, Russia, and Saudi Arabia are among them. And replacing Russia means turning to places like Qatar. So it's clear some compromises will have to be made when it comes to human rights and trade. Now, for more, let's bring in Maria Demertis, the Deputy Director of the Bruegel think tank. So, Maria, thank you so much for joining us. So the EU, on the one hand, wants to cut Russia out of the energy supply. On the other hand, it is striking these deals with countries like Qatar that have questionable human rights past histories there. Isn't that a bit hypocritical?
Well, yeah, it just points to an incredible dilemma. We have had 20 or 30 years of globalization where the motto with which we were operating was, expand, reduce cost, increase the trade links, promote growth for all countries in the world. And now we realize, of course, that was not the best of strategies. How do you roll this back? This is the dilemma, and at the same time preserve the level of welfare that we have in Europe. This is an incredibly difficult dilemma, but we have to confront it because, as we saw, the path that we traveled in the past 30 years is also not sustainable. It amounts to types of issues that could lead to war like the one we're witnessing now.
So just taking a broader look at this war and the outcome it has had, countries are obviously being put in a position to pick a side. What sort of effect is that having on global trade relationships in general?
Well, as you say, we are creating camps that are not really new. They had been there for a long time, and it is very much a division of ideology in some ways, a division in the way that we like to do business, and a Western model and an Eastern model. And the camps have already been created. But the fact is, what is the end game here? Can we continue to talk between the two camps? Or is it de facto an isolation of a bipolar world in which you have two competing systems that only talk to each other, not the rest? I find this a very, very bad outcome, not only because trade relations would suffer, our welfare will suffer, but also because the biggest challenge here, namely climate and energy, it requires the whole world. You cannot solve climate with just talking to what we call now the like-minded countries. We need to talk to everybody. We need to engage with everybody. And that means that, the polarization of the world is very bad news for climate.
So you mentioned it there. We do seem to be seeing, you know, a West versus East situation. What does that mean for the global economy if we do see, you know, the U.S. and EU coming closer together as the Western bloc, and then, you know, Russia and China sort of forming this anti-Western bloc?
De facto, that means less interaction between the two blocs, to the extent that I can define them this way. The interlinkages that we have today between the two blocs are enormous, and it's very difficult to decouple. And if we were to decouple, it would imply huge welfare losses for both sides. The cost will go up for just about everything. The supply chains will be shortened, and therefore that is very bad news for everybody. The question is, can we maintain it?
That is Maria Demertz's Deputy Director of the Bruegel think tank. So much for joining us. Now, India has been reluctant to criticize Russia and its invasion of Ukraine. While that has angered Western allies like the U.S., experts say India's position reflects historical economic ties between itself and Russia in the defense industry and increasingly in the oil industry.
India is the world's leading buyer of arms. Until last year, it accounted for 11% of total global arms imports, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. Its biggest supplier was Russia. Between 2017 and 2021, it accounted for 46% of Indian arms imports. And in the previous 5-year period, Russia accounted for more than 2/3 of Indian arms imports. India has been trying to reduce its dependence on Russian arms and diversify suppliers.
If you look at other countries, let us say in Europe, France, Britain, Japan, they're all dependent on the US for their security. Okay? India is not dependent on the US for its security. India certainly likes US political support. But at the end of the day, India depends on itself. So it is self-interest which is driving Indian policy. I don't think any ideology drives it.
Joshi says Moscow also supported India's foreign policy in the region before and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But that's not the only reason. Self-interest may be behind New Delhi's choice to remain neutral on Russia's war in Ukraine. India imports 80% of its oil needs, and rising oil prices have already led to protests. So while other countries spurn Russian oil, India is buying it. So far, it has bought at least 13 million barrels, according to Bloomberg News. And without that many takers of Russian oil, India may very well benefit from lower prices.
Now, for more, let's talk to Charu Kartikeya, our correspondent in Delhi. Charu, India has been criticized by the U.S. for being on, quote, the wrong side of history for buying Russian crude at a discount. What has India's response to that been?
Well, Chelsea, India has not really registered a formal response to that very specific comment about buying crude from Russia. But Foreign Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar made the statement in Parliament yesterday, and he said that India's stand on Ukraine has been very consistent. India is consistently reiterating that hostilities and violence need to end. And at the same time, India has been asserting that the global order is based on the UN Charter and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all countries. About oil, all that India has said is that the component of Russian oil in India's import basket is less than 1%, and it doesn't really matter much to the trade. But yes, there are reports that 13 million barrels of oil have been bought, and several Indian companies have gone ahead and placed those orders. There are reports that Russia is offering oil at a discount of 27%, and India is thinking about or planning to use those oil stocks for shoring up its strategic oil reserves, Chelsea.
Russia and India are also reportedly working on a rupee-ruble payment mechanism for that oil. How significant is that?
Well, yeah, that's very significant, Chelsea. That's because since trade is continuing between India and Russia, the payment systems need to be finalized. Several exporters in India as well as in Russia have said that this rupee-ruble mechanism that existed years ago needs to be brought back because a large number of Russian banks have been cut off from the SWIFT system, and that is impeding payments. Now, the tricky thing is that both the currencies need to be pegged to a third currency so that some kind of exchange rate can be worked out. Indian exporters have been asking the Reserve Bank of India, which is India's central bank, to work out this exchange rate so that their payments do not suffer. Some experts also believe, Chelsea, that this rupee-ruble trade is already going on because the governments have been very secretive about it. There has not been clear-cut information from either side, but many believe that payments are already being made in rubles to Russia. So yes, that's something the government as of now has only said that several payment mechanisms are being looked at. There is a team, intra-ministerial team, that is looking into formulating a strategy, and it will be announced soon. Chelsea.
Is that a signal that India might be looking to boost trade with Russia in more than just oil?
Well, Chelsea, that's a little bit hard to say because in any case, apart from the arms trade with Russia, oil is the biggest component of Indo-Russian trade. Apart from that, India also buys sunflower oil, which is whose prices also have been going up in India. So if that is also offered at a discounted rate, India will likely be tempted to continue doing that trade. Fertilizers are also something that India continues to buy from Russia. So I think what India is looking at right now is to maintain this trade relationship and not really, it's not really planning to expand it further. But at least maintain the items that are being bought from Russia, and if they are being offered at a discounted rate, that's be very good for the Indian economy. That's what the government appears to be contemplating right now. Chelsea.
What does this all mean for India's relationship with the West, particularly the U.S.?
Well, yeah, that's a tricky part. That's a sort of a tightrope walk that India has been doing ever since the war began. We've all seen that in the several United Nations resolutions that were brought to condemn Russia, India abstained from all those resolutions. India has been demanding cessation of hostilities and violence consistently, and at the same time, it has been saying that the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all nations must be respected, and that is the basis of the global order right now. Of course, India has hesitated from condemning Russia, and that has become a sort of a friction point between India's relationship with the West, especially US and the Europe. But even if we look at the response coming in from Washington or from Europe, it's a sort of a blow hot, blow cold sort of a policy. When the US made that comment that India must remember not to be on the wrong side of history, just a couple of days after that, White House Department of State spokesperson Ned Price said that India is a partner of choice for the US. So it's a blow hot, blow cold sort of a thing. They are consistently nudging India to align itself more clearly with the West's stand against Russia. But at the same time, they're trying to also play a sort of a balancing game as far as their interests in India are concerned. Chelsea.
Charu Kartike in Delhi, thanks so much for joining us. Now, Switzerland has joined the EU in imposing harsh sanctions on Russia, but it is yet to restrict Russian commodity trades. The vast majority of those deals are done in Switzerland, bringing in even more money for the country than tourism.
Even in neutral Switzerland, there are regular demonstrations against the war, like here in Geneva at the headquarters of the United Nations. The focus is on the oil and gas trade, which is still taking place and filling Putin's war chest. Up to 80% of Russia's raw materials are traded in Switzerland. Companies such as Gunvor, Mercury, Rosneft, Glencore, and many others are Swiss-based and continue doing business largely unchecked. Commodity trading really needs to be regulated. There needs to be transparency when it comes to commodity traders' payments to governments, especially to autocratic regimes, which then divert these funds into their own pockets. They pocket the funds, or in the worst case, they finance wars with them. There's not much happening these days at this inconspicuous address. It's the Swiss branch office of Nord Stream 2. After German and U.S. sanctions were imposed on the pipeline project, there were more than 100 layoffs at the firm.
The Kanton Zug war involviert.
The Canton of Zug was involved in the termination process.
Und wir haben dort Informationen.
And we received information that the Nord Stream 2 accounts have been blocked.
Und das hat für uns im Rahmen.
And for us, that meant there's a de facto insolvency in the context of these terminations.
De facto Insolvenz.
Even though the Swiss government has now fully complied with the EU sanctions, raw material trade via the Alpine Republic has continued. Russian gas is being ordered, delivered, and paid for. New cash for Putin's war chest. Only a complete energy embargo against Russia would help. In this situation, we believe that an embargo on Russian oil and gas must be discussed internationally and supported by Switzerland. We could make an embargo against Russia if we don't order anything, but we have to be prepared, especially when it comes to gas. We have to obtain the scarce capacities of other countries. We have to be prepared to demand less, and relatively quickly. The energy embargo against Russia that these demonstrators are seeking is possible. It would mean in future that Switzerland has more control over its commodity trade and could avoid indirectly financing wars.
Well, now my colleague Stephen Beardsley joins me in the studio to answer some of your YouTube questions. Stephen, thanks for being here. So we'll start with Dr. T, who asks, Western sanctions seem like someone is holding your savings and doesn't want to pay you back. How is that even legal?
Yeah, I'm assuming he's referring to the decision by many Western nations to not honor the foreign reserves that Russia has in their holding. And, you know, this has happened before. The Taliban, for example, their foreign reserves are being held as well, and they're not being allowed to be liquefied. But for an economy of this size, it is sort of breathtaking, and it's unprecedented in a lot of ways. The question is, for the legality, is there a court who really can adjudicate this? No. You could say, why did you give your foreign reserves to another country to hold? But of course, that's the idea, is you hold dollars, you hold euros, you hold other currencies besides your own. That helps you to prop up your own currency as well at home. It is unprecedented. And, you know, there have been some criticisms, modest, you would say, but more those who are asking the question, what does this really mean? Are reserves now not money? Because reserves are money. And if you then say that they cannot be liquidated, then you throw them into question. And that could speed up this move away from globalization. If nations start to believe that they can't trust other currencies, then what are they going to do? If they can't trust the SWIFT transaction messaging system, then they're going to find alternatives. If they can't trust if businesses can't trust being in a certain country, then they may reduce their footprint in supply chains. What we're seeing potentially with this is more pressure to move away from diversifying into other countries, regions, whether it's your businesses, whether it's your reserve currencies, things like that. So that is one of the things that makes this so impressive when you look at it, and does make you scratch your head sometimes.
Definitely an existential question about what is money.
For sure.
Okay, so next we have Higher Spirit, and he or she is asking, am I missing something here? Isn't Russia still providing oil for the European Union and the UK? Why is the focus on China in media and not with others?
Okay, well, this seems to be maybe in one sense a criticism on our last show, in which we did focus a bit more on China. Of course, that was the theme then. We have focused plenty on the EU's connection with Russia when it comes to fuel, as we have today with this program. But there is a connection between the two. If Europe is not going to pull as much fuel from Russia, then of course maybe China can step in and take up some of that capacity. And that goes in general for Western businesses and the marketplace in Russia. If Europe is going to leave it whole scale, Europe and the US, Japan, South Korea, all these nations who have announced sanctions, then there is room for someone else to come in. It could be to China's benefit. So, one leaves, another comes in. And that could actually not necessarily be to Russia's benefit as well, because that gives more leverage to China, for example, if they want better terms for gas or oil. So it is all interconnected. And we do really pay attention to here a lot of the hand-wringing around this question of, how Europe tethered itself so strongly to Russian energy. And that's something that's taken place over years, over decades. And you see this a lot here in Germany. You see it elsewhere in Europe, this sort of grappling with this question, was this wise? What should have been done instead, and what is the way moving forward? And I think that's what we're going to continue to focus on in the future as well, including talking about LNG, for example. That's just one path, but not the whole answer.
Okay, and this is a question that I had never thought about, but is actually a very good question. CR or Kerr, we were debating the pronunciation earlier, but right. When Western companies are pulling out of Russia, are they leaving all their property behind?
Well, I think the trick here is, are they pulling out of the country? I would say most of them to this point have said that they are suspending operations. So they're not, putting factories, not disassembling factories and putting cars and ships and things like that on trains and hauling them out. Right now, this is an evolving situation. Volkswagen, for example, when we talked to them, they said, well, we're going to keep paying our employees there for 3 months. And we said, well, okay, what after that? And they said, we don't know what's going to happen with this in the next month, so how can we say? So this is definitely a developing situation, and I would imagine that most businesses, including those who have been there for decades, they obviously want to go back, and they imagine still serving a Russian clientele. They have businesses there, they have connections, so they're not necessarily exiting things out of the country. There is this question of whether Russia might try and nationalize or expropriate some of their property. They've been making signals about this, making noises about it, but that's not as easy as it sounds or they make it out to be. There's legal risks there. There's also the fact that many of these businesses that are in Russia are actually importing their goods, especially when it comes to consumer goods. So it's a lot easier said, but it's going to be difficult to put that in practice.
Stephen Beardsley, thank you so much for joining me and answering those questions. Now, the war in Ukraine has driven an estimated 3.7 million people out of the country. Many who left are devoting themselves to helping those who remain in Ukraine. Here is the story of 2 farmers who are doing just that.
Tim Nanderstedt is a German farmer in Ukraine. He and his business partner spent a decade in the country growing wheat and corn before leaving due to the war. Now back in Germany, they're organizing aid convoys with the help of Ukrainian friends. The donations come from ordinary Germans.
Where we are in western Ukraine, the supply situation is pretty good. There's food. What we're bringing to Ukraine now is going through friends and contacts into the war-torn areas. There, conditions are catastrophic. If Kiev and Mariupol are encircled, there'll be nothing there. So our people are driving straight into Kiev.
The 2 farmers have left their machines and fields behind, as well as their local workers. Via the internet, they keep in touch with their 10 employees in Ukraine. A few are at the front, others are trying to keep the farm going. This is video from last year's harvest. It was a good one. The farm turned a profit. Whether they'll even have a harvest this year, however, is unsure.
The big question is whether we'll be able to get enough diesel fuel. It looks bad right now as we run out in the coming days. And of course, we need to be able to plant the summer's crops and keep tending to the winter ones. If we get a minimal amount of diesel, we'll concentrate on what we've already cultivated and try to bring in that harvest.
As soon as it's safe to, the 2 farmers plan to return to Ukraine themselves.
You've been watching a special edition of DW Business, looking at how the war is reshaping global trade alliances. For more from us, check out our website, dw.com/business. We're also on the DW News YouTube channel. You can find us on Facebook. Until next time, take care.
What's making the headlines and what's behind them?
DW News Africa.
The show that tackles the issues shaping the continent.
Life is slowly getting back to normal here. We're on the streets to give you in-depth reports and insights.
Our correspondents on the ground reporting from across the continent.
All the trends that matter to you.
In 30 minutes on DW.
Město je rozpůlenou švestkou v cukrovém nálevu.
Už
několik hodin jdou pomalu, jen se plouží. Padavé ovoce.
DW Books on YouTube.
Every day counts for us and for our planet. Global Ideas is on its way to bring you more conservation. How do we make cities greener? How can we protect animals and their habitats? What to do with all our waste? We can make a difference by choosing reforestation over deforestation, recycling over disposable, smart new solutions over staying set in our ways.
The Earth is truly unique, and we know that that uniqueness is what allows us to live and survive.
Global Ideas, the environmental series in Global 3000, on DW and online. How long does a moment last? Or an eternity? Time, it can be measured precisely. And yet, everyone experiences it differently.
As if there are different forms of time.
Time. A phenomenon. A dimension.
We know we won't live forever.
An illusion? About Time. Presenting Futures Past. Starts April 14th on DW.
This is DW News live from Berlin. Smoke in the skies in the west of Ukraine. Local authorities in the city of Lviv report 3 new major explosions. This comes as Moscow signals a shift in focus to the eastern Donbas region. Also on the show, U.S. President Joe Biden is in Warsaw, where he's held his first meeting with Ukrainian officials since the war began. Following those talks, he's set to call for the West to stand up against Russia's invasion. We'll take you to Poland to take a look at what is being done to help those most in need. Hello, I'm Claire Richards, and a warm welcome to the show. We begin with breaking news from the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, where there have been reports of 3 powerful explosions. Lviv is located around 70 kilometers from the Polish border and has been seen as something of a safe haven for those fleeing the Russian invasion of the eastern, northern, and southern parts of Ukraine. After the blasts, black smoke was seen rising above the city. A local city council official called on people to remain calm and to stay in their homes. So let's get straight across to DW's correspondent, Funny Fachar, who is reporting for us from Lviv. Funny, tell us, what have you seen and heard?
We were in the middle of editing a story for DW News for tomorrow as I heard explosions, and some of us actually in the hotel thought maybe this is just thunder, as it was really windy all day. It started to rain, but it turned out it wasn't thunder. It was several explosions. It's yet not confirmed actually what the target of that attack was. The governor here of the state says that apparently 4 people have been wounded in 2 airstrikes. But once again, the conflicting information here, how many airstrikes, how many explosions, and not even talking about just really how many people were wounded in it. I never thought and believed that actually I would have to wear a flak jacket and a helmet in Lviv, the biggest city of Western Ukraine, because actually this is a part of Ukraine that so far, more or less, was considered safe, even though just over a week ago, on March 18th, the civilian airport, which is about 7 kilometers from here, was also hit without casualties, thankfully. But it clearly tells you that these attacks, these airstrikes, indicate that even the western part of Ukraine is not safe. The question really is whether these airstrikes are more of a symbolic, have more of a symbolic meaning to scare people than actually damage a lot of things. We do not know that yet.
Now, despite these explosions, it does appear that people there are out in the streets. What was the reaction to this from where you were?
Exactly. Even now, you probably see people are walking behind me. Actually, the air raid siren, that signal that something is going to happen or is likely to happen, it's not over yet. So people are actually meant to be inside, in a bomb shelter, in a bunker, or just be it in their bathrooms in their apartments, because that's deemed the most safe place in any apartment. However, yes, you see also people walking around, because it's obviously not the first time that they hear an air raid. Sometimes you hear it several times a day, and in a way, ironically or not, but people are actually getting used to this. It's been almost, well, it's the second month actually of this war that started on February 24th, and people kind of develop a routine when they hear an air raid. However, certainly more people are inside, but then that speculation whether it's to the bad weather or actually to the air raid, we do not know, but there are always very mixed reactions when there's an air raid siren. However, given the fact that this is for the second time that missiles have hit, cruise missiles hit Lviv, it certainly indicates that more is to come. In fact, on the Twitter page of the mayor of Lviv, people are warned to stay at home because he expects more airstrikes to come and to hit Lviv today.
And Fanny, can you give us a sense of how close you are to where these explosions took place? And how close they are to the center, for that matter?
Quite close. Yes, quite close, given if really those missiles hit apparently the TV tower, but that's not confirmed yet. If that was the case, it's really just a few kilometers from here. But as I say, there's a lot of speculation what was actually hit. So as long as we do not know that information, I can only say that it happened towards the eastern part of Lviv, the eastern outskirts of the city center. But we could hear the explosions ourselves here in the city center, and smoke has been photographed actually by one of my colleagues rising over a building. But once again, I do not want to feed into any speculation here as long as we do not have more information, as we're waiting to hear for more information what really the target was of that explosion that happened just about an hour ago here in Lviv, in the biggest city of Western Ukraine.
Our correspondent Fanny Fachar reporting for us in Lviv. Thank you so much for that update. So Ukraine has now seen a month of fighting that has left thousands dead and forced more than 10 million people to flee their homes. Now, Moscow has said it's shifting its focus to Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. And while the Kremlin claims it has largely successfully completed the first phase of what it calls its military operation, analysts say it could be a sign Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to save face after failing to subdue Ukraine or to capture its capital, Kyiv. But as Moscow changes focus, the human suffering from its invasion shows no sign of abating.
Signs of spring greeted Kyiv on Saturday as Ukraine shakes off its winter and enters a new phase of war. There may be a change in strategy after Russian defeats, but there's little respite for those on the front lines of battle. Many are visibly exhausted but steadfast in their determination to stay. Putin came, as you can see, he says. Our children and grandchildren are dying. I'm 62. I can't leave this place. I'll stay here. If need be, I will die here. But I will not give them Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have recaptured areas on the outskirts of the capital, Kyiv. Still, lives continue to be destroyed. At this hospital in Kharkiv, the wounded continue to arrive as Ukrainian forces come under heavy fire. In Mariupol, the damage inflicted by Russian bombs is clear. Unfortunately, nothing remains of Mariupol, and they're bombing it with savage weapons. This last week there have been explosions like I've never heard before. They hit residential areas with rockets. Hundreds continue to flee Mariupol, saying goodbye to their decimated city and to those who must stay behind.
Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent, Nick Connolly, and we asked him what people in Ukraine and in Russia are likely to make of Moscow's announcement today.
I think there are very few people here in Ukraine who would take that announcement at face value. I think this is more about trying to make lesser demands, make a more manageable goal to then sell to the Russian public as a success, given what is arguably a fiasco in the rest of the country and Russia's failure to make significant progress in recent weeks. Going into this, you had messages from Moscow about being able to take Kiev in a matter of days rather than weeks, and that obviously hasn't happened. Indeed, there is a lot of fighting beyond Donbass, not just around me here in Kiev, 25 kilometers down the road in Irpin. The fighting continues, although it seems like the Ukrainians will be able to push back Russian forces quite significantly in some places near Kiev. In the south, around Mykolaiv and Kherson, is some news coming in today that even the Ukrainians were able to return to Kherson, which had been the one major Ukrainian city under full Russian control so far. So pretty difficult to really judge those carefully because there aren't many journalists, independent journalists on the ground, but a sense that this is a war that is very much going on, and this is by no means the beginning of the end.
This is our correspondent Nick Connolly for us in Kyiv. We also spoke to Dr. Aglaya Snetkov. She's a lecturer in international politics at University College London School of Slavonic and East European Studies. And we asked her how the war is being portrayed within Russia and how Russians are reacting to it.
So at this stage, we haven't seen much of sort of pushback against Putin. Now, we have to keep in mind that we are sort of back into the land of sort of criminology. So we have to watch and sort of look at what's going on because we don't have much information about what's going on inside the regime. In the country, it seems that most Russians see the sanctions and the effects that are happening on the ground. They're blaming that on the West sort of wanting to destroy Russia. So they're not associating that with Putin's failure in Ukraine. They're very much associating that with sort of the West hating Russia. Now, there have been reports of sort of the Russian defense minister, Shoigu, suffering from sort of heart problems. There have been sort of talk about potential sort of Putin regime going against some of their senior officials. We haven't seen that at this stage. So I think the support is still there, but there is a clear recognition, even at the senior level, that the original goals of the operation just haven't succeeded.
Let's bring you up to speed now with some other developments in the war in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron has proposed an international mission to evacuate people from Mariupol, the Ukrainian city devastated by Russian attacks. Macron said he was working on a humanitarian operation together with Turkey and Greece, and he would soon call Russian President Vladimir Putin to work out the details. Crowds unfurled a giant Ukrainian flag and shouted, "Go home," at a rally in Slavutich after Russian forces entered the city and seized a hospital in the town. Russian forces responded by firing into the air and deploying stun grenades to disperse the crowd. And more than 130 refugees from Ukraine have arrived in Germany from Moldova. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have fled to the small former Soviet republic. Germany plans to airlift 2,500 refugees out of Moldova to help it deal with the new arrivals. On his second day in Poland, U.S. President Joe Biden is set to deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The White House says the president will call on the free world to stand against Vladimir Putin. Now, President Biden is in Warsaw for talks with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda. The two are set to discuss the situation in Ukraine with the West's military, humanitarian, and economic response to the war on the agenda. Earlier, Biden also met with the Ukrainian foreign minister and defense minister in his first face-to-face talks with top Ukrainian officials since the war began. And for more, let's go to our correspondent, Barbara Vazel, who is outside the royal castle in Warsaw, where we expect U.S. President Joe Biden to speak soon. Barbara, what can we expect to hear from Biden today?
The White House has announced this as a groundbreaking speech, a speech that will set the course for the future for Western countries and NATO and generally the alliance. To deal with the war in Ukraine. How do we position ourselves? We need to be unified. That is supposed to be one of the messages. We need to be strong in defending democracy, because the fight that is being fought in Ukraine is not only their own. It's it's the fight of all Western countries, the fight of democracies against autocratic countries. So this is the vein this speech will be trying to sort of set out the course for the next weeks and months and maybe years of dealing with Russia and particularly dealing with Vladimir Putin.
Now, this speech we're expecting will come off the heels of Biden's meeting with the Polish president earlier today. Do we know what came out of that?
Of course, Joe Biden again sort of told the Polish president that, yes, Article 5 of the NATO treaty, that's the article where member states promise each other that they will defend each single member state against invasions or incursions from the outside. That is valid. That article really sort of holds true, and we will stick to it. Joe Biden said we will do this. So Poland, of course, being a borderline state here, the outer the outer side of the NATO countries, it's scared in a way that the war might sort of go across the border, that they might have to defend themselves against Russian incursions, maybe bombs or maybe incursions in the airspace. So that is yet to be seen, but Joe Biden tried to really reassure the Polish side. They want 30,000 U.S. soldiers stationed in Poland permanently. That's their wish. At the moment, there are about 10,000. We don't know yet whether Biden made any additional promises there. But of course, generally, he's really trying to do everything to tell Poland that, yes, we're by your side and we recognize your situation and you're being very brave in dealing with it and dealing particularly with the stream of refugees that is reaching Poland on a daily basis.
And in addition to the 30,000 soldiers, are there other concrete demands that Poland has made?
Poland has presented a whole 10-point plan. They want much tougher measures against Vladimir Putin and against Russia. They say, for instance, we need to have a humanitarian mission, international mission, under the protection of NATO, the United Nations, whoever, in order to alleviate the situation in areas like Mariupol, where civilians are caught in these horrible siege situations. And that's their main demand, really. But there is more. They say sanctions need to be much tougher. They need to come immediately. We can't wait to cut off oil and gas till the end of the year. It needs to be done now. Trade with Russia that is still flowing through Belarus, for instance, is supposed to be cut off totally. So there's a whole range of measures. Many of them could be done relatively quickly, but the main one, the demand for a humanitarian mission into Ukraine, that is something that the American side has so far tried to sort of block off. But we heard, for instance, from the French President Emmanuel Macron today that he also reiterates that call and says, yes, we can't watch what's happening there. We have to figure out a way to help people and to get them out. So he is also raising his voice for a mission. So slowly the alliance might be moving that way, but it doesn't look particularly quickly.
Barbara Vazel for us in Warsaw. Thank you so much for your reporting. Now, as Barbara mentioned, Western countries have imposed economic sanctions on Russia over its war. But so far, the European Union has been reluctant to stop imports of Russian fossil fuels, which make up a large share of Europe's energy mix. Leaders have been scrambling to find replacements.
Pipelines, still bringing Russian gas into the EU. Around 40% of Europe's gas consumption comes from Russia, which is why EU leaders haven't been able to agree a ban on imports as a way of trying to force Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. But what they did do at a summit in Brussels, attended by President Biden, is agree a deal to buy more gas from the US.
We need to work toward developing infrastructure which will allow us a greater capacity to move gas where we need it. That means we have taken a conscious decision to better connect national networks.
The plan is to increase imports from America by an additional 15 billion cubic meters this year, with an aim to increasing that to 50 billion per year in the coming years. Currently, EU imports from America stand at 22 billion cubic meters annually. The EU's annual dependence on Russia is 150 billion cubic meters, though, so the increases from the US won't be enough to plug the gap.
I know that eliminating Russian gas will have costs for Europe, but it's not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, it's going to put us on a much stronger strategic footing.
What isn't clear from the statement is how much more expensive the gas coming from the US will be for Europe, or how shipping ports, which are already nearly at capacity for importing gas, will be expanded. Liquefied natural gas doesn't just flow through pipelines like Russian gas does.
There's the well in America. You take a bucket of gas out, liquefy it, put it on a ship, send it across the Atlantic. It goes into an import terminal, which will take that liquid gas, turn it back into gaseous gas, and then it goes into the domestic pipeline infrastructure and is used exactly the same way that the Russian would be. But there are all those steps.
Following the agreement with the US, EU leaders continued their summit and hit a major friction point over whether governments should now be allowed to intervene in the markets to cap energy prices, which are soaring for their citizens.
And many of those who flee Ukraine often arrive traumatized in neighboring countries. The war itself, the sudden need to leave everything behind, and the journey out, as well as the uncertainty of what might come next. All of that can be overwhelming. Well, DW's Monika Sharacka sent us this report from the train station in Przemysl on the Polish border with Ukraine. There she met Ewa Budna, a Polish psychotherapist who is offering new arrivals psychological first aid. And meanwhile, more than 500,000 people have fled to Moldova's neighbor, Romania. The country is a member of both the European Union and NATO, and is the second most frequent destination for Ukrainian refugees after Poland. Many arrive with harrowing tales of their escape from the war.
It's just a short ride to safety, but for many here, it comes after a long and perilous journey. This family reunited at the docks. Some came by ferry, others over land, leaving behind a home caught in some of the fiercest fighting so far.
In Mykolaiv, the situation is very bad. It is being shelled from every direction. People who are able to flee are fleeing. It is hard. I want to go home. I want to go home very much.
Ukraine's short border with Romania runs along the Danube River. Ferries land at the town of Isacha. With only a few thousand inhabitants, it has become yet another transit point as refugees flow out of Ukraine. Many of the new arrivals are fleeing southern Ukraine, where the Russians have been attacking cities like Mykolaiv, near the Black Sea coast, and moving towards the major port city of Odessa.
I could have never believed in such things before. Honestly, this is a shock. We could have never believed that the sky would have been so dangerous, that we'd be afraid of airplanes and other things. I didn't expect any of this. Every day there is death, there's destruction. So to be there is very scary, especially with small children. That's why we left. We first went to Odessa, stayed there for one night, but there are air raid sirens every day, destruction, shots fired, the whole package.
The Red Cross has set up tents to welcome the Ukrainians. But these tents and this town are just another transit point for those arriving. Their journey is far from over.
We're going to turn our attention now to some of the other stories we are following for you at this hour. A Saudi-led coalition has launched overnight airstrikes on the Yemen capital Sana'a and the Red Sea city of Hodeidah, killing at least 7 people. The attack came a day after Iranian-backed Houthi rebels staged a daring attack on an oil depot in the Saudi city of Jeddah, ahead of today's Formula One race in the kingdom. A volcano has erupted near a scenic lake in the Philippines. Authorities raised the alert level in the region and urged residents to evacuate. There have been volcanic earthquakes and concerns that further eruptions may occur. Now, experts are warning of possible fast-moving gas and a tsunami in the lake. And Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of celebrated rock band The Foo Fighters, has died while on tour with the band in Colombia. The 50-year-old joined the group, formed by ex-Nirvana musician Dave Grohl, in 1997. In a statement, the band called his death a tragic and untimely loss. You're watching DW News. Before we go, let's get a recap of our main stories at this hour. 3 powerful explosions have been heard in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Black smoke was also seen rising above the city. Local officials have called on people to remain calm and to stay in their homes. And on his second day in Poland, U.S. President Joe Biden has met face-to-face with Ukrainian officials. Later, he will deliver a speech on the crisis in Ukraine. The U.S. president will call on the West to stand against Vladimir Putin. Just a quick reminder, you can always get DW News on the go. Just download our app from Google Play or in the App Store. Now, that will give you access to all the latest news from around the world, as well as push notifications for any breaking news. And if you yourself are part of a news story, you can also use that DW app to send us photos and videos of what's been happening. That's all from me for now. Up next, in just a moment, we will have DW News Africa, so do stay tuned for that. And don't forget, you can find all the latest news and analysis on our website. That's dw.com, or you can check us out on social media, Instagram and Twitter, at DW News. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin. I'll be back with more news headlines at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
What's making the headlines and what's behind them?
DW News Africa.
The show that tackles the issues shaping the continent.
Life is slowly getting back to normal here. We're on the streets to give you in-depth reports and insights.
Our correspondents on the ground reporting from across the continent.
All the trends that matter to you.
Next on DW.
In May of 2021, both the German and Namibian governments finally struck a deal on what to do about atrocities committed in this country by the former colonial power. The question we're asking today is it really possible to pay for atrocities committed in the past?
It's a genocide. Pay the reparations.
We need to look past it and just look forward to what the future holds for all of us.
The 77% in 60 minutes on DW. Sometimes a seed is all you need to allow big ideas to grow. We're bringing environmental conservation to life with learning packs by Global Ideas. We will show you how climate change and environmental conservation is taking shape around the world and how we can all make a difference. Knowledge grows through sharing. Download it now for free.
This is DW News Africa. Coming up on the program, what is the state of Africans fleeing the war in Ukraine? A group of international students in Ukraine spent 3 weeks living in a basement. We hear about their harrowing escape to safety. And in neighboring Hungary, meet some of the African students who fled Ukraine and those who are helping them. Also coming up, sexuality education is being put back on the school curriculum in Uganda. This after a court ruled that the government's ban of the subject was illegal. And it used to be a crime to play this traditional musical instrument during Zimbabwe's colonial times, but it's now here to stay. We'll find out why. Hi, I'm Eddie Micah Jr., and you are welcome to the program. A group of international students living in Ukraine have finally managed to make a daring escape from the Russian-occupied city of Kherson. Kherson was the first major city to fall to Russian forces after the invasion started just over a month ago. Now, around 100 international students, many Africans among them, ended up trapped in the town. They tried to flee several times, but were turned back by Russian soldiers. They spent more than 3 weeks living in a basement. With the temperatures below freezing at night, they had no heating and limited food. But now, most of the group have finally managed to escape. They spent 4 harrowing days fleeing through war-torn Ukraine. They have now arrived safely in the Polish capital of Warsaw. I'm joined now by Jerry Kenny. He's the head of the International Student Union in Kherson. He's now in Warsaw. Hello, Jerry. So after a couple of failed attempts, you have now managed to get people stuck in Kherson out of the city and into Poland. How did you do that?
Hello, how you doing? Yeah. So it has been a thing of decision that I need to put together to ensure that this works. It was never a trial for me to fail. I always believed that someday these people will get off to Kherson. So I decided to take it my own way to ensure that there is a 0 casualty, 0 death, and a 0 injury. So I spoke to some persons, and where I was connected to the captains from the Russian side, which captured Kherson. So it's from there I get to know some people. I won't mention names. So as we play along, we have to grease each other's hands to ensure that things work, because I see that the government was not willing to do it in a way it's supposed to be done. So, and these people are getting sick. So I need to play smart, move closer to them to ensure that something is done for them to be able to live. So I get connected to some persons, which I do what I think is necessary as far as I save the lives of the Africans there in Kherson.
Yeah. So you're saying you had to grease hands. It wasn't an easy journey. Tell me about the dangers you faced.
Okay, at some point where we were being pointed at with guns, and they strip off of our clothes, and explosions, which we actually, unfortunately, it wasn't planned for. We saw some person dead, and we need to move forward. So a lot of harassment on the road. So stripping off us out of thousands of people wasn't ideal at all. It was a terrible moment for us.
It's really good to know that at least you managed to get a lot of people over into Poland. What is your current situation now?
Okay, everybody now is good. No more shelling, no noise. They sleep very well and they have good food, not sick, and they are not in the basement. So they are now, if you see around me, so we're in an apartment where they have been offered to stay. So everybody's doing fine now and everything is good.
That is definitely great to hear. So what are the next steps for you and the others?
Okay, definitely what these people actually fought for was to give them a hope after this maltreatment. So what their plan is to get to any of the borders so they can speak to their people and proceed to the next available, border, which will accept them to further their career, since their career is taken away from them and they will not be able to study in Ukraine for now. So they want to further more in other European Union countries.
What would you say is the biggest concern now you guys have?
The biggest concern we have now is that, some of these people, their hope has been displaced. We just want if there should be support for individual among all these people, support them in a way to just encourage them that there's hope for them in future.
Okay. We definitely wish you all the best. And you are a brave young man. Thanks a lot for all that you've done for those that needed the help. Jerry Kenny, head of the International Student Union in Kherson, thank you. Now, many of the nearly 15,000 Africans studying in Ukraine have managed to flee the country. Some have already been evacuated back to their home nations, but many others are still in Europe. They are not only in Poland, as we just heard, but also in Hungary. A group of African students in Budapest are getting support from a local chapter of a Nigerian diaspora organization. At a meeting in a church basement to pick up clothes and food, they share their concerns and hopes for the future with us.
The first thing I'm worried about, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say this, is not knowing what to do next. For example, my temporary residence permit here is going to expire soon. So first, that's number one thing I'm worried about. I don't want to be here illegally. And secondly, we don't know when all of this will end. So we need to continue schooling. Some people are final year students. I personally am in fourth year. I'm in medical school, and I genuinely don't know what's next for me. Those are like major concerns.
I was supposed to complete my schooling in May. My final exam was in May, and then because of this war, I cannot write my exam. I don't know when I'm going to get my certificates. I'm in my final year of medical school. There's uncertainty right now.
Most people really say we should go back to where we came from, but home is where we stay and where we've called, where we find peace. And Ukraine has been really peaceful for all of us that have lived there. So right now, this is the first time that I'm going through this kind of turmoil, and I would really like to beg everyone that can to help us stop this war so we can go back home in Ukraine.
Now, earlier I spoke to Enebechi Makoli Ebuka, Vice Chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Organization in Hungary, who is helping African students. He tells us what help his organization is providing.
Here in this center, we try to give them food every day. And we also have like clothes, sleeping bags. And currently right now, we are trying to help them with accommodations through Airbnb. So we have some partnership with other nice organizations providing these Airbnb accommodations. And we're also trying to help them with flight tickets for those that want to go to Nigeria. So once they come into this center, they tell us their problems, what they need, the kind of assistance they need, those that want to remain here in Hungary, those that want to transfer to schools in Europe. We try to get this information, and we try to work towards this information to provide them these basic things they need, and at least to also make them feel very comfortable while here in Europe.
So what is the main challenge many of them have?
Okay, currently now, the main challenges they have now is that they are all worried. They don't know what to do next. They always complain that as the night is coming, they don't know what they are going to do tomorrow. Especially with the fact that, for example, those in Hungary, they are worried about their residence permit, their stay here, because when they came in, they gave them a 1-month visa. And now they are also trying to see if they can transfer to schools, and most of the schools are not admitting them yet. And when some of them that went to the immigration office to find out if they can extend their permit, they were told that they should either get a job or a school. So Nido Hungary here, we are trying to see how we can get these schools for them, or maybe help them to get a job, since this is the major thing that the Hungarian government is asking. But this is really a very big challenge for them, because they are trying to find a way to remain here. They complain about the racism they faced in Ukraine, and most of them are scared going back to Ukraine after this crisis. They don't even know when the war will end. So they want to continue with their school, and they are finding possible means for them to have this opportunity to remain here, either get a job or go into schools.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned yourself, clearly they are facing a lot of challenges. So why don't they want to take flights back home?
You know, like they say, they don't know when the war will stop in Ukraine, and they don't want to just stop their education. That's why most of them here, they want to quickly enter into a school program. Also, universities in Nigeria, they're even on strike, and they are not sure if they go back to Nigeria, if they are going to just start a school in Nigeria. So they prefer to be around Ukraine. You know, it's even cheaper for them to go back from here to Ukraine if the war ends. But like we all know, nobody knows when the war is going to end. So, and they don't want to just go home and start home doing nothing. They prefer being here and starting up a school here.
That was Enebechi Macaulay Ebuka, the Vice Chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Organization in Hungary. You're watching DW News Africa. Still to come. Sexuality education in schools is being put back on the curriculum in Uganda. That's after a court reversed an earlier government ban. And playing this musical instrument used to be a crime in Zimbabwe's colonial times. We'll find out why it's now here to stay. But first, Burkina Faso has sworn in a transitional assembly. It's responsible for approving reforms for the country's democratic future. This comes after a military coup that was condemned by the international community. The coup ousted President Roch Kabore, blaming him for not tackling an Islamist insurgency.
The sash commemorates their induction to Burkina Faso's new assembly. A third of the transitional parliament's 71 members were chosen by coup leader and President Paul-Henri Damiba. Civil society groups, regional authorities and security agencies picked the rest. The assembly members will work alongside a new cabinet and civilian prime minister appointed by the military. They'll vote on which reforms the country will adopt as it seeks political and security stability.
Mais je puisse d'ores déjà vous dire qu'au regard de la situation
in view of the state of security, as well as the economic and social situation, we have our work cut out for us. We must accompany the transitional government in its firm determination to free our country from the current terrorist hold, which is causing our country to suffer greatly.
Today, we are all committed to the search for peace. Simply peace. In the hope that the work that is going to take place, that in the end we will achieve peace. The same kind of peace we used to enjoy in Burkina Faso a long time ago.
Burkina Faso has been increasingly targeted by a deadly Islamic insurgency, as in other parts of West Africa. Ousted President Roch Kabore failed to dampen the attacks. This meant many in the country of 20 million welcomed the coup. The African Union and the regional body ECOWAS condemned the military takeover and suspended Burkina Faso. But ECOWAS said it won't abandon this troubled nation in its time of need.
Now, Uganda's schools have been ordered to reinstate sexuality education. The government banned teaching children about reproductive and sexual health more than 5 years ago. Now, the High Court has ruled that this ban is illegal, but not everyone is convinced that's the way to go.
Shakira Chakwaire is 17 and about to have a baby.
For more on this, I'm joined by Fatia Kiyange from the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development in Kampala. Her organization is the one that took the government to court for not providing sexuality education in schools. Hello, Fatia. Nice to see you. So, how could sexuality education help lower the rate of teen pregnancies?
Sexuality education empowers young people to be able to have the knowledge and skills and behavior that can help them to protect themselves against many risks that could expose them to health problems such as HIV, such as other sexually transmitted infections and early pregnancies.
So why else does your organization believe that sexuality education in schools is important?
It is important because, first of all, it is a right. Young people have a right to sexuality education, because only then that we can realize inclusive and quality education for everyone. But most importantly, young people need sexuality education because, again, they are exposed to the risks, but also we have cultural norms and social norms that disempower young people to think that people have power over them, including those that abuse them. So sexuality education enables them to have the power, to be confident, to protect their own health, more so when they are faced with situations where they experience challenges such as gender-based violence, sexual violence, and so on.
So the court has ruled that the government must come up with a curriculum. What subjects would you like to have put in focus?
I think subjects such as those that are exposing young people to risks, they are facing a lot of challenges around sexual violence. So subjects such as those, their bodily autonomy and how they can protect their bodies, decision-making around issues of their sexual and reproductive health, and going beyond the usual reproductive health system to link that with the day-to-day realities of young people would be appropriate, but most important, to make sure that it's progressive, it's phased, and it's age-appropriate sexuality education.
As you would obviously know, there is pushback against this, isn't there? Some parents and religious leaders worry that sexuality education encourages children to have sex. What do you say to that?
I think it's just a misinterpretation by the religious leaders and the parents that when you talk about sexuality and sexual and reproductive health, you're talking about sex. While sexuality is much broader than that. It's about the behavior of young people. It's about their emotions. It's about things like physical abuse of young people. So it's much wider. And so for me, I believe it's just that it's a misinterpretation. Otherwise, there is research evidence that sexuality education enables young people to delay their first intercourse.
Okay. Fatia Kiyange from the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you. Now, this is the mbira, sometimes called a thumb piano. It's found all over Africa, but it's closely identified with Zimbabwe's Shona people. The instrument was all but legally banned by colonial rulers. Now, there's a resurgence of interest in the traditional instrument. From Zimbabwe, DW correspondent Privilege Mushanari reports.
The thumb piano has been played for over 1,000 years. It remains at the heart of Zimbabwe's Shona people's cultural identity. During colonial times, the mbira was banned and branded evil. Anyone found playing it was arrested. But the practice and the instrument survived. At this remote camp, traditional mbira musicians are being taught the basics of reading music. For some, this is their first encounter with music notes. They came here from Zimbabwe's 7 regions to create a unique mbira orchestra.
We are unifying the types of mbira that are found in Zimbabwe, played in the different cultures that are in the ethnic groups in Zimbabwe. So we are tuning the mbiras into the same pitch, then train the artists to perform the mbira as an orchestral group to revive our own Zimbabwean culture.
For years, the art of playing this gentle and soothing music has traditionally been transmitted by apprenticeship mainly within families. Kevin Chikumbirike, a mbira teacher and maker, wants the instrument to be accessible to all.
It was the elders of past years that preserved the instrument until it gets to us. So now we should take it upon ourselves to continue preserving this instrument so that our children, the children of our children, will be able to have a few of these instruments. They should not go extinct.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And top African music legend, the late Oliver Mutukudzi, became a powerful advocate of the instrument. Mbira player Hope Masike joined him on the world stage many times. She loves integrating traditional mbira music with modern styles.
When we fuse different music styles, we give it a longer life to start with and a broader audience. Where I could have just played mbira on its own and had the mbira audience, now I have the mbira audience and the hip hoppers also. They're at the same concert and they're consuming the same thing at the same time. This gives it a broader audience and a longer life.
Playing in unison and finding new harmonies, these musicians are also pushing the timeless sound in new directions. They hope to inspire a whole new generation of mbira players.
That's it for now. For more of our stories, go to dw.com/Africa or visit us on Facebook and Twitter. We leave you with a reminder that 10 African countries are vying to represent the continent in this year's World Cup in Qatar. We will only find out after the home and away games. It's time to separate the boys from the men. So will it be Salah's Egypt or Mane's Senegal? Will Cameroon conquer the Desert Foxes of Algeria? What about the Black Stars of Ghana versus the Super Eagles of Nigeria? Then there is DR Congo versus Morocco. And not forgetting Mali locking horns with Tunisia. May the best teams progress.
Journeys of Despair with Natalia and Dima. They were abroad when the war broke out. Now they want to return to Ukraine to their children. With Maria and her grandchildren from Odessa, a difficult escape by foot and hitchhiking. Ukrainians flee Putin's troops to an uncertain future.
Close Up. In 30 minutes on DW. We're all set to go beyond the obvious. We're all in as we take on the world.
8 hours. I dropped all the shares.
We're all about the stories that matter to you. Whatever it takes.
5 policemen following. I am being detained.
DW.
Where we are here is actually on fire.
Made for minds.
On the green fence.
Do you feel worried about the planet? Me too. I'm Neil, host of the On the Green Fence podcast, and to me it's clear we need to change. The solutions are out there. Join me for a deep dive into the green transformation. For me, for you, for the planet.
What does war do to people? Are hatred and violence inherited from generation to generation? An award-winning documentary searches for answers. For 2 years, the author accompanies a Salafist family in northern Syria.